and welcome to episode 5 of Sorastro's Marvel Crisis Protocol painting series. In this video, I'll be painting Captain Marvel from Atomic Mass Games' Marvel Crisis Protocol. Captain Marvel has been given a wonderfully dynamic sculpt, as she levitates in the air, her head tilted forward as she raises her fists ready to unleash another energy blast. As you can see, I've chosen to have some fun with some dynamic lighting effects to try to capture her sense of energy and power. Let's take a look at the painting stages. As usual, I've chosen to prime the figure in black, followed with some grey and white zenithal highlights applied from above as detailed in episode 1. I'm then providing the base colours, keeping the tones fairly dark to allow the highlights and lighting effects to really stand out. We can then apply the highlights, and along the way I'll be providing some object source lighting to sell the idea of the hands being filled with glowing energy. For the finishing touches, I'll be repainting the glowing hands, and I'll also be adding some patches of heat to the base to suggest we're looking at the results of a recent energy blast. Let's jump in with the base colours. I'm going to begin by painting the blue parts of the suit, using a roughly 3:2 mix of Vallejo's Dark Sea Blue and Dark Prussian Blue. With all of the blue tones, I'm aiming to control the saturation, as well as the levels of yellow, or green, in the mix to achieve the look I'm after. I'm now going to paint the red areas using Scalecolor's Deep Red, darkened with a little black. You can see I've accidentally painted the gold emblem on the waist, which I'll be correcting in a moment. For the golden sections, I'm using a roughly equal mix of Japanese uniform and brown violet. With all of these base tones, I'm looking for a fairly opaque finish. Next, I've chosen to paint the hair using some English uniform, darkened and desaturated with just a little black. And I've chosen to wet blend a rough highlight of pure English uniform to the top of the head. For the skin, I'm using Citadel's Bugman's Glow, once again darkened with a little black. I'm now painting the eyes using pure white. And I'm making any necessary corrections with the surrounding skin tone. Next, I'm also giving the gloves an undercoat of pure white, and if you're not going for the glowing hands look, you could of course paint them red. I'm now going to paint some fluorescent yellow and orange on top to give me a frame of reference when I begin adding the object source lighting in a while, but we'll be returning to repaint them later on, so you could skip this for the time being if you like. I'm starting with some of the yellow mixed with just a little of the orange. And I'm now wet blending in some of the orange. Finally, I'm also painting some of the yellow over the eyes. We're now ready to begin adding the highlights. I'm going to begin by highlighting the blue outfit, and to reach the midtones I'll be adding a roughly equal mix of Vallejo's Prussian Blue and Medium Blue to the original base tone in a couple of stages. You can see I'm not just following a strictly zenithal approach when doing this, and I'll be playing around with my placement of highlights to help create a somewhat shiny and reflective look. This is now the pure Prussian Blue and Medium Blue mix. Here you can see me creating additional reflective highlights to break up this area of shadow, and I think it's important to freely try different ideas out with the aim of creating an interesting profile of light and dark. For the brighter highlights, I'm now going to begin adding some turquoise along with some white to control the brightness and saturation. The way you actually apply the paint is up to you. Sometimes I might use quite long, smooth strokes, and other times I might apply a series of short lines, like cross-hatching. And other times I might just stipple the paint on, especially if there's not much room to manoeuvre the brush. For the brightest highlights, I'm also adding some light turquoise alongside some additional white. You can see here that I'm imagining light hitting the body from the nearby glowing hands. Notice that unlike with Captain America, I'm letting the shadow tone cover much larger areas of the suit, broken up with more discrete sections of highlight, which, when coupled with the more extreme levels of contrast, helps to create the impression of a more reflective surface. This is my brightest highlights tone. Here I'm just trying some ideas out on the arms, which I later decided to repaint, so you can ignore them for now. Next I'm going to use the fluorescent orange and yellow tones to introduce some colour to the highlights on the blue suit, to show the light being given off from the hands. This can be glazed on in thin layers like you can see me doing here, And we can also mix these fiery tones with some white and apply it using a more opaque consistency, which is good for hitting some of the smaller or more raised details. Naturally, I'm pushing these tones further for the areas that are closest to the glowing hands. Object source lighting like this really relies on consistency across the miniature, so won't make much sense until the rest of the figure has been painted, and I'll be returning to tweak the highlights here later on. Next I'm going to highlight the areas of gold using the same tones we used for Iron Man back in episode 2. This means I'll be progressing from the base tone up to pure Japanese uniform, then to German yellow, and finally I'll be adding some white. Here I'm adding some black to some brown violet and using this to add a little dark lining. I'm now going to highlight the areas of red by firstly progressing from the black and deep red base tone up to pure deep red, and then Antares Red. I'm now adding the Antares Red. And this is now pure Antares Red. For the boots, which I want to appear a bit more shiny, I'm going to boost the brightness by firstly mixing in some white to create a pink tone. I'm now painting some fairly thin Antares Red on top. Because of the level of white underneath, we now have a much more vibrant look in these final highlights. For the remaining areas, I've chosen to lighten the tone with the addition of some Sol Yellow to create some more orangey highlights due to the proximity of the glowing hands. You can see that I'm going pretty orange for the areas that are closest to the hands. To achieve maximum vibrancy for the brightest highlights, I'm going to use some white to provide a light undercoat, and then paint the orange highlight tone on top. I might also add a touch of these orange highlights to the boots as well. Next I'm going to highlight the face by firstly progressing from Bugman's Glow to Cadian Fleshtone. My aim here is to create some more dramatic side lighting, so here you can see me sketching out my initial placement of highlights. I'm now lightening things with the addition of some white. This is certainly not a one-way process, in that I'll often go back and forth between tones to adjust the volumes or blend the transitions. Now I've got the main values mapped out, I'm going to freely introduce some more orangey tones, using the Sol Yellow and Antares Red highlight mix we used earlier. You may notice the consistency of the paint varying a fair bit. I might increase the opacity for applying new highlights, or use a more translucent mix to tint or blend larger areas. I'm now mixing quite a light highlight tone for the lower lip. And I'm now extending this out a bit and toning it down. Finally, I'm going to highlight the hair by adding increasing amounts of yellow ochre to the English uniform. And I'm now going to progress up to pure ice yellow for the brightest highlights. We're now ready to add some finishing touches. As I now have a more definite idea of how I'd like the hands to look, I've chosen to repaint them, starting with a clean undercoat of pure white. I'm now using both the white and the surrounding blue of the outfit to more cleanly define the edges of the energy effect. You can see I'm also adding some small particles to the surrounding area to add to the sense of energy. I'm now painting the hands using Fluorescent Yellow mixed with a little of the Fluorescent Orange, and it's okay if we leave some white in some of the gaps, such as between the fingers. I'm now using more of the orange the further down the arm we go. I'm building this up in a couple of layers to achieve quite an intense orange tone, and taking care to hit all of the little nearby particles. Next, I'm giving an orange boost to some of the golden highlights. I'm now painting the rock using Vallejo's Stonewall Grey, which I've mixed with some black for the more shadowed areas. You can see I'm painting this quite loosely, doing some wet blending along the way. I'm using pure Stonewall Grey for the upturned surfaces and raised parts of the jagged texture. I'm also using this for the surrounding pavement, just as I did with the other heroes. And here I've added a little white along with some Bonewhite to boost the highlights on the rock. I'm now shading the base using Nuln Oil thinned with a roughly equal amount of Lahmian medium. After highlighting the pavement back up, I'm now providing a thin edge highlight around the rim. Next, I'm gluing down some additional pieces of stone, which are just ripped up pieces of cork painted grey. And I'm sprinkling on a little urban scatter by Jarvis over a layer of thinned PVA glue, as detailed back in episode 1. I'm now lightening the rocks up to match the main central piece. And finally, I've chosen to create the impression that parts of the rock are actually glowing with heat, an idea inspired by my friend Sasha's work over at Duke's Paint Art. So I'm first dabbing on some small patches of pure white. We can then paint over the white using the same fiery tones we used for the hands, starting with the yellow, and now the fluorescent orange. And this completes Captain Marvel. Thank you so much for watching. I very much hope you've enjoyed the episode. Please be aware that you can find additional PDF guides for some of the other figures in the game over at Sorastro.com. And as always, you'll find details of all the paints and brushes used in the video description below. My deepest thanks go to my amazing patrons for supporting this work, especially during these difficult times. It means the world to me that I'm able to continue producing and sharing these guides. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures for Marvel Crisis Protocol. Happy painting!